Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, and this is my 1000th video. Yes, I have done 1,000 videos in 20 months, so I guess that's about 50 a month. I guess I'm even shocked at that. I'm not quite sure how this happens. I really don't. All I know is that one day during the pandemic, I said to myself, I think I better do something. I was locked here going stir crazy, and I could have typed and typed and typed reviews till my fingers bled. But I said, hey, this is 2020, what was it? 2020, I guess, at the time, or something like that. It was May. That's what I know. Yes, May 2020. Yeah. And I said, gee whiz, let's do something a little different. I've been doing this for 35 years or more. I mean, let's get the word out, because here we are sitting around and we need music. And the rest, as they say, is history. And I want to thank all of you who have been joining me on this amazing little ride that we've been taking, which I really, now that it's going, it's just going to keep going. I see no point in stopping. So take heart. There's so much more to do. That's the thing about this medium. The more you do, the more remains. And so we will try and dig into the remains as well. And for this 1000th video, I've decided to take another one of your suggestions, because you out there have been my biggest inspiration. You really have. And it's been just such a joy hearing what you wanted to talk about and being able to talk about it. Oh, wait, one thing. 1,000 videos gets a gong whap. One of you suggested that either, so he suggested that also. Pardon me, I'm so excited, I'm like tripping over myself. So here it goes. Yeah, pretty cool. So what are we talking about today? The ideal list of Sibelius tone poems. I think I've got an even dozen of them here. I didn't even count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11. Yes, there are 12. 12 fabulous tone poems, at least. Actually, the number of tone poems in Sibelius is a little bit indeterminate, because there are some works that you might want to call tone poems because they aren't otherwise defined. There are lots of bits from incidental music that are programmatic. And some of them are pretty substantial. There are pieces like In Memoriam, which is this giant Mahlerian-style funeral march, but that's what it is. It's not a symphonic poem. It's not designated as such. There's that weird little piece called Pan and Echo, also Dance Intermezzo number 3 is how it's also known, and it's a dance intermezzo. We're going to have a dance intermezzo problem in a moment, which you will certainly see. So, yeah, I mean, you could argue, but I think this even dozen is pretty healthy. And as with most of these things, I have not repeated a single conductor, because I have a didactic purpose here, which is simply to show you how many wonderful performances and Sibelius interpreters there are who are worth listening to. This ideal list is not necessarily my favorite list of every work. It is not necessarily my however performance from the videos on the individual tone poems. It is a list which has no weak links. And that is my criterion. And you, I'm sure, could come up with your own list for some or all of these works, and I invite you to do so, trying not to repeat conductors. But if you do, it's okay. I mean, there's no penalties off, and since this is the 1000th video, we can afford to be a little bit indulgent, I have a feeling. So let's have at it, shall we? The first, these are in roughly chronological order, by the way, but very roughly. Number 1, is Onsaga. That's sort of like the first canonic tone poem. And the performance I have chosen is on the BIS label, and it's Nimi Järvi. Nimi Järvi with the Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra on BIS, because he remade it on DG. And this one is better. It's better because the engineering is better. You see, Onsaga is one of those pieces. It does not require any timpani at all whatsoever. There is no part for the timpanist, but there is one hellacious part for the bass drum. And if you've got a recording that really rocks in the bass. It's really special. I mean, there are marvelous performances of Onsaga, like, for example, Carillon's is fabulous, but the bass drum isn't there. Ormandy's is really great, but the bass drum isn't quite there, because of the recording technology of the day or the preferences of the conductor. It is true. Sibelius marks that the part be played mit Paukenschlagen, or Paukenschlägel, or whatever they call it. That is drumsticks, timpani sticks. And timpani sticks on a bass drum, if you've ever done that, I mean, I have, does not make that big, deep bass sound particularly. But I don't care. You've got to have that big, deep bass sound because it's absolutely thrilling. And there are a couple of versions that really nail it. Colin Davis with the Boston Symphony is one, Esa-Pekka Salonen with LA is one, and this one, perhaps best of all. This thing will rattle your foundation. It will think that it will make your neighbors think a seismic event is going on. And that is what you want with Onsaga. You really, really do, because the music is so powerful and so primal. I mean, it really gives like the Rite of Spring a run for its money when it's done the way it can be done. And here it is. You also get the 2 sets of scènes historiques, which are gorgeous and too little known. So this is just a wonderful, wonderful disc. It's not the longest playing. It's 55 minutes? It's not bad. Not bad at all. And the sound is just, oh. So for Onsaga, Järvi on bis, Nimi Järvi, that is. The N Järvi. We'll be dealing with the P Järvi later. So, there you go. Onsaga. Fantastic. Next, speaking of Järvis, the Lemminkainen legends. Now, I did a whole video on the Lemminkainen legends already, why they're really a symphony. We talked about recordings of them. And the truth of the matter is, I've talked about a lot of these pieces individually, and I'm going to continue to do that, just like I did with the symphonies. But, you asked for an ideal list, and I really think we should get one, because as a composer of symphonic poems, Sibelius had no equal at all. I'm not saying there weren't other people who were as good. I mean, he had an equal. He had equals. He was the best among equals. He was the equal, whatever that phrase is. I don't know. He was as good as it gets. Can we just say that and leave it at that? I don't want to, piss on Richard Strauss or Tchaikovsky or any of those other people who wrote fabulous symphonic poems. But Sibelius's natural mode of expression was the orchestra, and he was equally adept as a symphonist and a symphonic poetist, symphonic poet, I guess. But he was just amazing at it. And these symphonic poems are incredible, and they deserve their own special niche. And so I really think we should do that. So Paavo Järvi does the Lemminkainen Symphony. Even if you want to call it a suite, it is a symphony. Sibelius called it a symphony in his more mischievous moments, and he was right. It is a symphony for the reasons you can check out on the video. Now, this was on Virgin Classics, and he did 3 or 4 Sibelius CDs on Virgin, which were also boxed up in a little box. They're probably all missing or out of print now. It wouldn't surprise me a bit, but it doesn't matter. It's a wonderful performance if you can find it. If not, then just go for another one of the ones that I recommend in the video on the Lemminkainen legends. But I do want to give Paavo Järvi a mention, because these early Sibelius recordings of his were absolutely excellent. There's a Kullervo. He did The Maiden in the Tower, Sibelius's stupid one-act opera. I mean, it really is silly, but the music's nice. And so there's good stuff in there. So anyway, Lemminkainen legends, very, very fine. Let's see, putting this down there. Next comes the Wood Nymph. Oh, yes. Now, I did a whole talk about how nymphs are bad for you. There's a video there, actually. Look it up under Nymph, a music chat, about everyone does the same story. The story is really very, very straightforward. The Wood Nymph, it's similar to the Ondine story, but the Ondine is a water nymph, whereas the Wood Nymph is a wood nymph. One of them is damp, one of them is maybe just moss covered. You know what I mean? But they're equally moist and humid. That's for damn sure. The story is. See, it's a bad thing to fall in love with a nymph. That's the story. There's usually some prince or noble thing. I mean, it's a fairy tale, right? And he goes into the forest and he falls in love with the nymph, and it ruins his life. Now, sometimes he dies, sometimes he's just miserable, sometimes he just gets sucked into the world of the forest forever. Something happens of that sort. And it's never good. And that is the story of the Wood Nymph. And this is Sibelius's longest tone poem. It's about 23, 24 minutes long. I mean, it's longer, really, than most performances of the Seventh Symphony. It is an amazing work that Sibelius never revised and never had published. And so, until recently. I mean, it was finally published, the past decade or so. When the BIS made the first recording for the Sibelius Complete Edition, that was, with the Lazzi Symphony and Venska, I was able to get a copy of the score. Oh, and what a hellacious mess that was. I don't know how they managed to read from it. I mean, they had stuff crossed out, and it was what a mess. That's the way he left it. I mean, it's totally complete. It's a finished work. And I have no doubt whatsoever that had he lived to polish it up and revise it, he would have cut it down a little bit and dipped and tucked and trimmed and polished, as was his wont. But it's okay. It's really, really, really okay. Because we have this big, beefy, raw bit of early Sibelius, and I want to play you a little bit. My recording is not the one that was on BIS. It is John Storgard's with the Helsinki Philharmonic on Ondine. Here it is. And you get with it the violin concerto with Frank Peter Zimmermann, which is superb, and the Bard, which is also cool. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I just want you to hear the end of the Wood Nymph. Like all Sibelius's pieces, or most of them, he had ending issues. He builds fabulous climaxes, he generates unbelievable momentum, and then can't always figure out how to stop. And this is one of those pieces that kind of does that. It sort of dribbles out at the end. It's a lovable fault, I would say. Here is the ending, the dire, scary, grim, fabulous ending of The Wood Nymph. cool, huh? So watch out for your nymphs. Stay away, guys. The nymphs are not good for you. I don't think there's a male nymph. It's one of those, the examples of the paternalistic male society in which we live, and which is in danger of getting swamped by wokeness. And I just hope, the woke people won't be upset at the nymph, because it's a male slanted story. Yes, it is. Too bad. Enjoy it. It's wonderful. Take some satisfaction in the fact that the male character is utterly, completely destroyed. That should make you feel good if you're one of those, woke terrorists out there. Okay, so that's that. Next, yes, Finlandia, also known as the soundtrack to Die Hard with a Vengeance. You ever seen that movie? I mean, I'm sure you've seen that movie. It's actually very, very well worked into the fabric of the film, because the first two notes, there's this it's sort of a leitmotif going through the entire film. And you don't realize that they're playing Finlandia till the very end, when the terrorists blow up in their plane, and all the other planes, which have been running around circling with no fuel, finally get to land, and they land to the happy dum ba da da bum 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 ba do 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 ba da. It's great. And my choice for Finlandia is going to be a very unconventional one. There are wonderful recordings of Finlandia. There are 100 different versions of Finlandia. I mean, literally. There's the choral version, and there's the underwater version, and there's the version for accordion orchestra. You name it. There's a Finlandia for you. But the normal one without the chorus, with just the orchestra, with the ending that we know, not the original ending. The original ending has a train running through it. It represents a train, believe it or not, and it represents the arrival of industrialization in Finland. It was written for a tableau vivant, which was one of those historical things where people sat there posed, like while music played. I mean, that's what they did. And this was the music that played. It had a different ending, and, okay. No, Kurt Sanderling. Now, Sanderling, he did the symphony cycle, which is a very grim Sibelius symphony cycle, because he was a very, very serious guy. Always a very, very serious guy. And Finlandia, he plays very, very seriously, and I like it. I like it. It has a weight and a majesty to it that's just terrific. But it's completely lacking in bombast and pomposity. It's just a very, very self-aware, serious take on the piece. And so I thought I would toss this one into the mix. Some of these symphony performances also are marvelous, and some of them are, just a little bit too heavy, I think. But generally speaking, this is one heck of a Finlandia. So this is on Berlin Classics. It's the Berliner Symphony Orchestra with Kurt Sanderling. Yeah, Finlandia. Next, what have we got? Oh, Pohjola's Daughter. Now, Pohjola's Daughter is such a masterpiece. It is one of Sibelius's greatest tone poems, which means it's one of the greatest tone poems by anybody ever in history, period. And there have been many, many great performances of it. You just want to point out that Pohjola is not a person; it's a place. The accurate translation would be daughter of the Northland, or the Northern Territory. La in Finland, in Finnish, when you have a word that has an la at the end, that's a place. That's the locative case. And so it means the place of. So it's the place of the North place. And this is the magical daughter of the North who stays up there spinning. She's kind of like a nymph, actually. At least she is in this story, because she attracts the hero Wainamoinen, who's zipping around on his sled, and she makes him do stupid things until he gives up in frustration. God, this is just a work of genius. Absolute genius. And one of the great performances, unquestionably, is Colin Davis with the Boston Symphony. Gorgeously played, fabulously conducted, amazingly descriptive and colorful music. It's got a big orchestra, especially for Sibelius, who was very careful in choosing the size of his orchestra. It's interesting how there's the story that Sibelius stopped using tubas because he was so upset with the tuba player at Helsinki, and after the Second Symphony, he never used a tuba in a symphony again, which is true, but he used them quite frequently in symphonic poems. So evidently that tubist couldn't have been too bad, because he did not give up on the tuba entirely. So Boston Symphony with Davis, this is the Eloquence, the Decca or Phillips Eloquence, and now Decca Eloquence reissue. It's also in the Davis Sibelius Symphony Cycle box from Boston, which is a marvelous cycle. And so, however you get it, it's definitely worth hearing. There are other fabulous recordings by Sjegerstam, by Leonard Bernstein, by, there's Eugene Ormandy. There's plenty of very fine Pohjola's daughters running around out there. Pohjola had a bunch of really hot daughters, so that's nice to have. Next. Well, I'm not quite sure where this fits chronologically, and I'm not quite sure if it's really a tone poem or not, but I decided to throw it in there and say, what the heck, why not? Spring Song. Spring Song is just pretty. It's just a pretty lump of Sibelius. And, what it's about, other than spring and song, I don't pretend to know, but it's a lovely hymn-like piece. Sibelius is not given much credit, for being a liturgical composer, because he wrote virtually no liturgical music. But the fact of the matter is that his symphonic style is often very, very hymn-like. The Protestant hymns of his youth figure prominently in a lot of his work, and nowhere more so than in Spring Song. One of his favorite endings is one of those Amen, whatever they call it, a plagal cadence or something. I don't know, it has a name. But it's an Amen ending. The end of the Second Symphony does it. He does the end of the first movement of the Third Symphony does it. They're everywhere. The end of Finlandia does it. Those hymn-like endings. And Spring Song is perhaps the ultimate crystallization of that hymn-like style that he has. And it's just a lovely work. So I'm throwing it in the tone poems because I like it. And I think it should go there. The recording that I have here is Pavel Berglund on Warner. Berglund has to be mentioned somewhere. He's just got to be. And he did Spring Song. He didn't do a lot of the stranger Sibelius. He did a lot of Sibelius, but some of the really odd and off the beaten path stuff he didn't bother with. But he did do Spring Songs. So that's really, really nice. And it's either with Helsinki or Bournemouth. Quite frankly, it doesn't say on the back here, and I'm not going to look at the booklet. But, the digital stuff was with Helsinki Philharmonic, and then there was the stuff he did with the Bournemouth Symphony, his earlier Sibelius cycle, and bunches of tone poems and things. And it's all cut up and, mixed up between the two. But Berglund, of course, was a fantastic Sibelian. And so for Spring Song, he deserves a mention. He really ought to be in there. Next. Oh, this one is problematic. One of Sibelius's larger tone poems, really is a big work, not very well known and not frequently played, Night Ride and Sunrise. The Night Ride, by the way, is not a horse, it's a train. Once again, it's a mechanical object. Trust me, it's a mechanical object. When you hear it. This is one of those pieces that it absolutely is what it says it is. You hear a night ride and you hear a sunrise. That's what it is. It's in two parts, two plain parts, the night ride and the sunrise. Get it? Right. The problem with this symphonic poem is the night ride, because it is monotonous. It is deliberately monotonous. Sibelius could very easily have said, I do not want to be monotonous. But he wanted something that suggests a certain, the word was monotonous motion, a regular rhythm. And so the piece just is and if you think that was monotonous, wait till you hear Night Ride and Sunrise. You get used to it, because what happens in the first half, the Night Ride part, and it's very similar to other, Sibelius did this more than once. Like, for example, Lemminkainen in Tuonela is sort of a similar concept. You just hear these scurrying string figures, and from that, little melodies in the winds begin to detach themselves and become more and more prominent as it goes on until it reaches a natural climax, it ebbs away, and then the sunrise happens, which is beautiful. I mean, it's just a lovely depiction of sunrise, a gentle sunrise. It does not end with, the blazing sun. Yeah, cha-cha-cha. It's not Girl Leader. It's not, the 400 voice choir doesn't come screaming in, nothing like that. It's a gentle, nature perfumed sunrise. And it's lovely. It's absolutely lovely work once you get to know it and once you understand what it is. But unfortunately, as with so many pieces, that means you have to listen to them. You have to listen to them carefully. You have to listen to them frequently. And since nobody would say that this is one of Sibelius' greatest works, most people don't want to spend the time listening to it carefully. But the music is there. The substance is there if you do. And if you know and love Sibelius and you know and love his style and understand it, then you'll come to enjoy the work too. You'll know exactly what he's doing and why. So one of the keys to a successful night ride and sunrise is a conductor who can really make the first part interesting. And that means paying a lot of attention to the strings, to articulation, to balance, to the sonority. And there's no one better for doing things like that than Leif Segerstam, who was himself an amazing violinist back in the day and who really, really gives the piece the love that it needs to be interesting. This is on Ondine, and it's with the Helsinki Philharmonic. They will turn up quite a bit in this series. But yeah, it's always going to be a work for the cognoscenti rather than for the average daily, casual Sibelius person. You gotta love Sibelius, and then you'll love Night Ride and Sunrise. So this performance at Ondine with Segerstam is just perfect. Absolutely terrific. Now, after Night Ride and Sunrise, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have, this is a little bit problematic for me. We have something called the Dryad. Now, what's a Dryad? Well, a Dryad is sort of a nymph. A Dryad is a tree nymph as opposed to, a naiad, which is a water nymph. Again, we just had that discussion, didn't we? And the Dryad is a short little 5-minute thing. It's Sibelius's Opus 45, number 1. Yeah. Number 2 is a little 2-minute and 45-second piece called Dance Intermezzo. And it's lovely. Oh, it's lovely because of the harp going, all that stuff. The Dryad has a castanet part. It's a very odd piece. And what's very curious about it is that if you know Carl Nielsen's Pan and Syrinx, the Dryad is similar to that. I mean, it's a Greek mythological thing, and it's short and it's weird. It's harmonically very odd. I wouldn't know what the heck is going on with this Dryad. It's unquestionably a tone poem, but it's teamed up with something which is unquestionably not a tone poem, and no one plays it for that reason. Occasionally, it's very hard to find recordings of it, by the way, but there is one here on this 2-disc Chando set of Alexander Gibson doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 8, 9, 10 Sibelius tone poems. And this you should just have. It's one of the great Sibelius recordings out there, sets. They're all wonderful. It's fabulous. You've got the best ever Lewanatar with Phyllis Brid-Ulsson. You've got a really zippy Onsaga, zippy, Tapiola, 15 minutes and 39 seconds for something that can take 20. Whoa. You've got one of the most amazing recordings of the Oceanities. It's just great stuff. Gibson was a fantastic Sibelius conductor. And the recordings are gorgeous, and they're pre-digital, but they sound wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Analog sound, and these have been out for a long time. Get them. Just get them. And listen to the Dryad. And that's all I'm going to say about the Dryad. I really wanted to talk about Gibson. That's the reason he's here. And as I said, in choosing these recordings, it's because you're going to get duplication. You're going to hear who the great Sibelius conductors are. Gibson was unquestionably one of them. This is with the Scottish National Orchestra before it became the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, and soon to become the really, truly Royal Scottish National Orchestra, or maybe the Empirical Scottish National Orchestra. I don't know. It's wonderful. Just get it. Just get it. Okay, so after that we have the Bard. Sibelius, this is around the time of the Fourth Symphony. So we're talking like around between like 1909 and 1913, 14, somewhere in there. Sibelius went through his weird phase. He was afraid of death from his throat cancer operation, and he wrote the really, really grim Fourth Symphony. And sort of in that general sphere are things like Night Ride and Sunrise and the Dryad and the Bard. The Bard is wonderful. It's completely unclassifiable. It's a totally, there's no particular way to describe it. What it is it's got harp solos, a harp strumming along bardically, beautiful harp part with very melancholy and strange harmony. And then there are little bits of tune, and then there are these sort of primal, you ever heard of like a lure? It's one of those Icelandic instruments, they're like those long, twisty brass things that go, it's like, or a shofar. Sometimes, in some performances, you think that you're at like, Rosh Hashanah services or something. But the that happens at the climax. These brass things come in, and then the harp just keeps strumming along, and it stops, and it's all over in about 8 minutes. Very, very unclassifiable and enigmatic piece, but extremely beautiful. And nobody else wrote anything even remotely like it. It really is a special sounding kind of work. And I chose a rather recent recording, which is quite marvelous, with the Lahti Symphony Orchestra, and not with Osmo Venska, because he's not there anymore, but with Aku Kamu. Here it is on bis. And with this, you get the Tempest incidental music, quite beautifully done, the overture, the two suites, the Bard, and Tapiola. Tapioca, as we used to call it when I was a kid. I know, I was an odd kid. We talked about the Swan of Salmonella and tapioca. Sibelius had tone poems about food issues, But the Bard is on here, and it's you see how dark the picture is? That's the Bard. It's a beautiful photo for the music here. You have that sense when you listen to the music of twilight and the sun dipping over the horizon and the redness in the clouds. It's really a wonderful visual image that fits the music perfectly. So that's what I would say for the Bard. Then we have Luwanotar. Oh, God, I love Luwanotar. I did a separate talk on Luwanotar. You can go watch that as well. What a glorious piece. It's a creation myth tone poem for soprano and orchestra. And again, it belongs to this period, this sort of Sibelius's, weirdness period. And it's just fantastically primal and glorious. And I'm not going to sing it because I did in the other video. And I know the piece really well. We did it I programmed it with our community orchestra, and it was just a knockout. Absolutely amazing. And I chose this recording on Ondine. Again, it's with Leif Segerstam. I know I repeated a conductor. Oh, kill me now. Now, I chose this one because of the singer, because of Isakowski. And, when you do Luwanotar, it's not about the conductor. It's about the soprano. You've got to have a great soprano who can really nail the thing. That's why I like Phyllis Brynjolfsson with Gibson. She has perfect pitch. And certainly Isakowski was a genuine Straussian soprano, just like Aino Akte was, who was the soprano for whom Sibelius wrote the piece. She was a very famous Salome in her day. And this is such a beautiful disc of Luwanotar and the songs. A bunch of Sibelius orchestral songs, and they are gorgeous pieces. People don't know them. You should know them, so you should know this. And I think it's just nice. I also wanted to have a performance of Luwanotar that wasn't coupled with 7,000 other Sibelius tone poems. I thought it would be more fun if we did it with some orchestral songs. So forgive me for repeating one conductor. I didn't even realize it when I was picking these out. I was just obsessed about who the soprano was, and I wasn't even looking to see who else was involved. But it's on Ondine, again, the Helsinki Philharmonic with Segerstam, and it is glorious. Soili Isakowski is Luanatar, or Luanatar. I guess if you're doing Finnish, like, I don't know. Tell me. Then we have the Oceanities. Now, the Oceanities is a non-Finnish mythological piece. It's Greek, like some of these other pieces, are Greek, like the nymphs and dryads and other sort of Greeky things. It's such a wonderful work. The key with Oceanities is timing. You have to time the last wave, because there's a tendency to hold back too long in that last wave, because the strings are going woo, and then the brass crescendo from behind, and it all comes crashing down, pow, with 2 sets of timpani, doing this crushing roll, and the strings come, right? And they sort of wind down like that. You cannot hold that wave too long. You gotta time it. It's a very interesting problem in musical aesthetics, the timing of that wave, because that's what's going to make it. The piece is very interesting. It's almost athematic. It consists of textural patterns and watery sounds, basically. That's what it is. And it's in perfect sonata form without a development section. It has a first subject and a second subject. And then you go back and it does the first subject and the second subject, at the end of which you have the big wave, and then there's a coda. That's the form of the piece, as simple as can be. But it has to be timed perfectly. And of course, you have to have sensitivity to all the luscious, watery sounds that Sibelius is making. Because when you're just having textures without themes, you have to keep the textures interesting, which means the playing of all of those string tremolos and things has to be really, really interesting to listen to, constantly and subtly varied. There are quite a few very fine Oceanities. I mean, there is the Segerstam, which is very good, and my favorite, personally, which was Gibson's, but I already mentioned him, and also another favorite, because I have more than one, as you will too, once you get to know these pieces, and that is Ormandy in Philly, one of his late Sibelius recordings. This was one of the RCA ones, not when he was at Sony or Columbia at the time. He did a bunch of late Sibelius stuff. He did Pochiola's Daughter and Oceanities, and it's just first rate, on a disc with the 4th and 7th symphonies when it was issued on CD. Wonderful performances, absolutely splendid performances. And this Oceanities is just great, because it's a piece that lives and dies by texture and string sonority, and when you need that, Ormandy is going to be your guy. And also the timing is just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. He was never a conductor given to self-indulgent extremes of tempo manipulation. And if there's any place where you do not want it, it's in Oceanities. The ocean is a thing. It's not a person. It doesn't have moods the way people have moods. Once it gets going, you got to keep it going. And Ormandy keeps it going. It's a beautiful, beautiful performance in this box. It's in this box of all of his Sibelius recordings, including the duplicates, both the Columbia and the RCA recordings. So they're very, very fine. So this was just, an easy choice, an easy call. But last but not least, here we are. We arrive at Tapiola. See, notice the la, Tapiola. Tapio is the forest god. La, Tapiola, is the dwelling of the forest god, the place where the forest god is. That's the end of my grammatical lesson in Finnish, because it's all I know about it, basically. Tapiola, of course, is an amazing spook piece. It's in exactly the same form as Oceanities. That is, it's sonata, basically sonata form without development. Although it sort of has one in the little fast passage in the middle as an episode, sort of. But you've got a big first subject, a big second subject, and then a big first subject and a big second subject, after which you get the storm. That unbelievable storm, which is very similar in texture to the storm in The Tempest. And also in in Lemminkainen and Twinella. Sibelius had a very standard format for storms. It involved chromatic string tremolos that go. That sounds like, somebody starting a chainsaw, but, and they don't sound like that. But it's a storm, and that storm has to be absolutely hellacious. I mean, it has to be insane. You cannot play that storm violently enough. It's such an amazing piece because that, no matter how violent it gets, it's so rigorously logical. I mean, the whole piece, it's the climax of the one big thematic motive that runs through the piece. Da-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum, ba-ba-ba-ba-bum. It's just, it's so cool. It's such a great piece. You could analyze it forever and never be done with it. And so I chose for Tapiola, Carry-On. Yes, he recorded it like 50 times, but boy, could he do that storm. I mean, he was the master of string texture, like Ormandy. He was into strings. He was into sonority, huge piles of sonority. And his Deutsche Grammophon recording is excellent, but this EMI one I like better. And I like it better, first of all, I mean, it's almost exactly the same performance. He takes 19 minutes. It's slow and spooky. But the reason I like it better is because the sonics on these EMI recordings have more edge. They're more raw. They have more visceral intensity, which makes the entire alien, inhuman landscape that Sibelius is depicting even more creepy and malevolent and threatening and brooding and dark. And well, you get the picture, right? So, Carry-On for Tapiola. You have to talk about Carry-On too. He was a great Sibelius conductor. And that, my friends, wraps up the ideal list of Sibelius tone poems in which I lied about not repeating a single conductor. Well, nobody's perfect. But one thing I will say, I've done 1,000 of these suckers. This was the 1,000th of them. And I want to thank all of you so deeply from my heart for joining me on this unbelievable journey that we began during the pandemic and which hopefully will emerge from the pandemic with plenty of momentum and a bright, shiny gaze ahead to the happy future of talking endlessly about classical music and all of the pieces that we love and that I have the honor, or truly honor, I'm not being sarcastic, I mean really the honor and the privilege to share with you. I mean, what a thrilling thing that is, after 35 years as a critic, to be able to communicate so directly with my viewership, or formerly readership, and also to continue with ClassicsToday.com, which I know you're all going to support by becoming ClassicsToday.com insiders. This is just, it's a privilege and a joy to be able to express my love of music this way and to have such a sympathetic and generous and warm-hearted response from all of you. So keep on listening, folks. Let's just do this forever. Take care.